Hello and welcome to another episode of Buy Low Candidates presented by Zilla Fantasy Elite. I am your host, Todd Hoffman. You can find me over on Twitter at ToddZilla1337. Today we're going to be talking about Joe Mixon and why we have him as a good buy low candidate heading into the 2021 season. First off, let's just take a peek at Joe Mixon's athletic profile over on playerprofiler.com. Taking a look at his size, he's coming in at a very, very healthy 6'1", 228 pounds. So he is a bigger back by even NFL standards. Second, if we glance over at his workout metrics, we can see he ran a 4.50 at his size, which is very good. Due to this, we see his speed score actually in the 92nd percentile. So we know Joe Mixon has some pretty gifted physical tools for someone at his size. Combining his burst, agility, and bench press, we can see he's coming in with a SparkX score of 120.4, which is good for a 76th percentile. Again, physically gifted, especially at his size. Next, just to gather some more information, let's look at some of those college metrics he had coming out of Oklahoma. As I've mentioned before in a couple of these episodes for Dynasty buys and sells, the metric for running backs coming out of college that correlates the most to fantasy success at the NFL level is the college target share. Here we see Mixon coming in with an 11.7% target share, which is above that 50th percentile threshold, coming in at the 84th percentile as a matter of fact. This means Joe Mixon definitely has some receiving chops who's already gifted physical tools. The number 2 most correlated metric is the college Dominator rating. This metric is a percentage of a running back's total team yards and touchdowns in college. And this is coming in at the 51st percentile for Mixon, again, above that 50th percentile threshold that we want for these metrics to be considered a success. And again, the number 3 and number 4 metrics for NFL fantasy success that are correlated, these two are actually correlated with each other. This is the speed score and the 40-yard dash. We can see Mixon was far above that 50th percentile threshold for both of these. And then the number 5 most correlated metric for the top 40 Dynasty running backs is the college yards per carry. Mixon again checks this box at the 90th percentile there. With all that being said, we can safely suggest that Mixon should translate pretty well into the NFL, and with the percentiles being so high on most of these metrics, we can assume he may even be a stud at the NFL level, and we've kind of seen glimpses of that throughout his career so far. And now that's his physical profile. It's out in the ether. It's implanted into your brain. So let's take a peek at his current situation in Cincinnati with the Bengals and see if we can gather any more information about why he is a buy low candidate going into the 2021 season. His head coach there is Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor is an offensive-minded head coach, and he's actually responsible for calling the plays there in Cincinnati on game day. He comes out of the Sean McVay coaching tree, and he was the wide receivers coach there in 2017. And then again in the 2018 season, he was actually promoted up to the quarterbacks coach. And that's when we saw Jared Goff have his best season in the NFL here. And that's, we can tell this guy should be able to coach up his players pretty well based off of that. If he was able to get Goff's best season out of him there in 2018, he should be able to coach up his players pretty well. With that being said, he has actually stated this offseason he would like to get back to a more balanced attack on offense next season. And we did see Cincinnati pass the ball quite a bit last year. So he's claiming already in the offseason that he wants to have a more balanced attack on offense going into 2021. In order to accomplish this, obviously they'll need to run the ball more than they did in the past 2 seasons under Zach Taylor. So what did Zach Taylor do? He actually brought back Frank Pollock as the offensive line coach and made him his first ever run game coordinator. So who the heck is this Frank Pollard, you might be asking? Well, he was actually with Cincinnati back in 2018 for just 1 year as the offensive line coach. He's been in the league basically as an assistant offensive line coach or the head offensive line coach for like 10, 15 years roughly. 2018, he came to Cincinnati as the O-line coach there. And Zach Taylor actually let him go when he came in 2019, however, in favor of a guy named Jim Turner, who now left. So in 2018, Cincinnati, when they were under Frank Pollock as the O-line coach, was actually almost inside the top 10 in the fewest sacks allowed at 11th, and also supplied Joe Mixon with his career high of 4.93 yards per carry. Again, on a horrendous team with a horrendous O-line, they were actually blocking well enough for Mixon to average nearly 5 yards per tote. They were also 11th in sacks allowed, which is pretty solid. Pollock was let go after that one season, as I had mentioned before, and headed to the New York Jets for the last 2 seasons. However, it sounds like Pollock was very, very, very much liked by the guys that were on that squad in 2018. In fact, when Zach Taylor announced that Pollock was coming back as the O-line coach and run game coordinator back January 9th of 2021, Joe Mixon tweeted out, let's go! It's a great day to be a Bengal. #Hooday. So Joe Mixon actually tweeted that out. Also in 2019, so 2 seasons ago, when Joe Mixon scored a touchdown against the visiting Jets, he ended up giving the ball that he scored with on that to Pollock to thank him for all of his help during that biggest season of his career. And it's just kind of a gesture to say, hey, man, I really appreciate what you did. And apparently it kind of brought some tears to the guy's eyes. And he just thought really highly of that gesture, thinking like, wow, I must have made an impact on these guys' lives. But that's kind of what happened in 2019 with Joe Mixon. And it sounds like Mixon wasn't the only guy who liked him either. Their center, Trey Hopkins, said it was an extremely popular pick in the locker room. And Hopkins actually said, I'm very aware of the progress that we made as an offensive line with Frank here. The way we prepared for the run game week to week, it will make the games easy. So that's kind of what he said as they announced this this presser to the news about him coming back as the O-line coach. So the center coming back and saying, hey, he's awesome. Joe Mixon saying he's awesome. Now he's back. So let's go back to that 2018 season then once again. And remember that Mixon came into the NFL as a very highly touted running back. And actually, if it weren't for that off-field incident where he knocked out the fellow woman college student, he likely would have been drafted in the first round. He was that talented and that highly thought of. As it would play out, he ended up going in the second round of the Bengals that year. He averaged only 3.52 yards per carry in that rookie 2017 season behind a horrendous offensive line. Pollock came in that next season with roughly that same offensive line, and Mixon averaged 4.93 yards per carry, and they were almost top 10 in the lowest amount of sacks given up. So big turnaround from 2017, going from 3.52 yards to 4.93, with roughly the same cast of characters on that O-line. So Frank Pollock seemed to be pretty good there. So with the addition of Frank Pollock and Zach Taylor now admitting that he would like to get back to a more balanced approach in 2021, I think we'll see Joe Mixon have a tremendous uptick in efficiency as well as an overall volume or usage bump. With that being said, let's just take a gander at his 2020 stats. And we see he had some pretty low numbers. This is due to the fact that he had a foot injury that was originally supposed to just keep him out for 2 or 3 weeks, which ended up turning into a season-ending injury. This does give a fantasy manager some concern, as the foot injuries do tend to hamper production when they come back from them. However, players that come back usually take 5 or 6 weeks after they started playing again, or after they come back before returning to their usual form. Mixon's been out since after week 6 of the season last year. He'll be back to 100% at the start of camp and all the offseason programs for 2021, so this shouldn't be an issue. However, we do see the 119 carries in 6 games, which is almost 20 totes a game. The 26 targets in 6 games, also a solid 4.3 targets per game. This is good for 24 opportunities per game, which is actually 4th in the league last year behind only Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Derrick Henry. Only one of his 6 weeks did he have less than 20 opportunities, and that was week 3 at 19 opportunities. A lot of people probably don't realize he was getting so much usage because the Bengals were passing the ball at such an incredible rate with Burrow under center. But he was right up there in opportunities with the best of the best last season. Those guys really performed well, and he was right up there with the opportunities. So a lot of people aren't aware of that. So I think with a more balanced attack next year, and assuming that the Bengals can land Penei Sewell in the 2021 draft and maybe pick up some more help somewhere in free agency along that line, we could see Mixon finally tap into all that talent and explode onto the scene in 2021 with a monster year. Mixon doesn't have a huge injury history either, so I don't think that's going to be a concern other than last year. So I think we can pencil him in for a good 15 games in 2021. If we simply continue the 20 rush attempts per game average and the 4.33 targets per game over the 15-game season, So not even increasing his usage, just continuing what he did last year, we can actually get to a total of 300 rush attempts and 65 targets in those 15 games. So if Mixon maintains the 81% catch rate he had in 2020 as well, that would come out to 53 receptions. So if we increase his efficiency like we expect with Pollock as the O-line coach and run game coordinator and bump him up to, let's say, 4.7 yards per carry and put his yards per reception at 8, nothing spectacular. He's eclipsed that twice and been below it twice. So I think 8 is a pretty accurate value there. We're looking at a season total line of 1,410 rushing yards and 53 receptions for an additional 420 receiving yards. Mixon has always been decent in the red zone, and I think the Bengals offense, if it improves like we would expect, we could also be looking at double-digit rushing touchdowns from him and a couple through the air. So let's give him 12 rushing touchdowns and 3 more through the air on his 53 receptions. In a half PPR league, this comes out to 299.5 fantasy points. That's quite a bit. Now, to put that into perspective, that would have been 4th last season in 2020, just behind Dalvin Cook at 315.8. The next closest after that was actually David Montgomery at 237.8 fantasy points. So in 2019, so 2 years ago, this would have been actually good for RB number 2 ahead of Aaron Jones by nearly 10 points. So remember, 2 years ago, Aaron Jones scored those 19 touchdowns and was just ridiculous. Joe Mixon's season next year in 2021 could be nearly 10 points better than Aaron Jones's season from 2 years ago. So this puts Mixon truly in elite territory if we see this come to fruition with all the opportunities and increased efficiency as we would expect with Pollock coming back and an upgrade along the offensive line. The fantasy community is pretty low on Joe Mixon right now, coming off a season in which we saw him miss the final 10 games due to injury. The narrative out of Cincinnati is still that they are a team that's going to air it out 60-plus times a game because that's just what Burrow was doing last year. Hyper targeting, lots of pass attempts. So I think that's in the minds of everybody that they're just a pass-first team, and they didn't realize that Joe Mixon was getting all this opportunity last year as well. So I think it's in the people's minds, 60 pass attempts every day, every single week. The people realize also that they have a crummy offensive line right now. However, if they could make some moves in free agency to help that, and if they draft Penei Sewell in the first round of the 2021 draft, this line could find itself at least average in terms of overall talent at the very least. Combine that with the coaching changes and play calling shift narrative that we could see here, and I think we could see Joe Mixon's top-end career projections come to fruition in 2021. Let's not forget that Joe Mixon is still just 24 years old. For some perspective on that, Najee Harris is the presumptive first running back off the board in not only the NFL draft, but also fantasy drafts in 2021, and he's going to be 23 before the NFL draft even happens. Joe Mixon's just 24 years old right now, so they're not that far off in age. Joe Mixon's still just 24 years. He's got another year or two before he hits that age apex for running back, so that's pretty solid production probably for the next year or two. Even given that, there's quite a few warts with all the warts that Cincinnati has, and Joe Mixon not quite living up to his potential as of yet in his career. I think you might be able to snag Joe Mixon away for some cheap prices in this offseason, especially before free agency hits. So I think some dynasty managers could find a cheap, nice pickup there right now. I'd be willing to pay upwards of a mid-first in a 12-team Superflex league right now to acquire Joe Mixon for that 2021 season if this truly comes to fruition, which I believe is a very solid possibility. I think you'd be more than happy spending a mid-first to get that kind of production from your running back. I also think you get him for potentially even an early second rounder, depending on how your league mate is viewing Mixon and Cincinnati's situation. I think an early second rounder could definitely snag him from some of these managers. So, or you could potentially give someone like a Melvin Gordon in a 22 second or 22 third, possibly, and just test the waters of whatever league mate that you have there and get what they're feeling for Joe Mixon, and you might be able to get him for super cheap there. So With all this in mind, this is why Joe Mixon is one of my favorite buy low candidates going into the 2021 season. I hope you enjoy this episode of Buy Low Candidates presented by Zilla Fantasy Elite. I'm your host, Todd Hoffman, and you can find me over on Twitter at Toddzilla1337. If you want more off-season Dynasty content like this, or you enjoy seeing the film with your own eyes on the up-and-coming guys in the NFL during the season, or you are looking for free help in building your DFS lineup using my proprietary adjusted line play report, which has proven to be one of the most successful DFS tools in the industry, give the Zilla Fantasy Elite YouTube channel a subscribe today. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.